So just quickly, and I can talk about this more if people are interested, but just quickly I want to talk a bit about why it's so goddamn hard to learn Chinese. Okay, where do we start? Yes, the writing system is a nightmare, objectively speaking, but I've never really experienced it as being a tremendous difficulty, because as someone who used to work in Japan as a translator, obviously my ability to read Japanese is quite strong. I recognize a lot of the characters, and the ones you don't know, you kind of learn them as you go along. You don't need any study plan, you just kind of look at stuff. If learning to read Chinese were a passion of mine, then I would approach things a bit more rigorously, but I'm not very interested in learning to read Chinese. I keep my notes in Chinese, I learn new characters as I go along, but that's about it. Anyway, yes, that's a big problem, but it's not the real problem. The real problem is some combination of the extreme difficulty of pronouncing Chinese properly, plus the utterly alien lexicon, plus the somewhat familiar yet sometimes extremely alien grammar. Basically, whenever you try and say something in Chinese, you have to bring to mind lots of very alien words that often sound very similar to each other, because Chinese doesn't have that many syllable types. Yes, they use tones, but I promise you, however distinct these words may be to the Chinese, they're not going to sound very distinct to you when you're trying to learn Chinese. So you have to bring to mind a certain number of very alien words. You have to do that quickly. You have to remember which tones they're pronounced with, because if you don't know the tones, you don't know how to pronounce the word, right? The tones are not something additional that are superimposed on top of a word in Chinese. They are part of the word, right? So you've got to have all this stuff bundled together in your head, and you have to figure out in real time how to take all the different tones of all the different words and pronounce them smoothly, because although the Chinese system of tones is presented as being something quite mechanical, in real life, of course, Chinese people, they take this sort of caricature of the way Chinese words should be pronounced and smooth it all out very quickly in real time to create something that's actually pronounceable by a normal human being. And you have to learn to do the same type of thing. No, you're not going to do it as accurately or as well as they do, but you've got to try and approximate it. And that is really, really, really hard. So your brain is trying to solve a lot of different problems in real time. And those problems are not the same sorts of problems that you would be solving with a language like Russian. Yes, Russian is damn hard in its own way, but the difficulty is more similar to the difficulty you would get in any European language, whereas Chinese is hitting you with different sorts of difficulty, and your brain has to deal with all of them in real time. So you have the extreme alienness of the lexicon, and yes, even if you know Japanese, it's very alien at the level of actually pronouncing it. Words do not sound the same. You can't say a word the Japanese way and expect it to work in Chinese, right? So there's that, and that it's like wading through treacle. In the early stages, trying to say anything in Chinese is like wading through treacle, even when you think you know how to put the sentence together correctly, grammatically speaking. Contrary to what many people seem to think about Chinese, its lack of morphology, almost complete lack of morphology notwithstanding, Chinese, like any other human language, is actually grammatically complex and sophisticated, and it's not that obvious how you're supposed to put sentences together. Often you can read a bit of Chinese or listen to it, and it seems very obvious how the sentences fit together and what it all means, and then you open your mouth and you realize that you do not know, you haven't internalized any of it or processed it to the point often where you can actually say it, and you just go, that is terribly, terribly hard. That is a terribly hard problem to solve. And that's before we talk about the listening side of things. This is something that I could discuss in more detail, but Of all the languages that I've studied, there's something uniquely difficult about trying to understand spoken Chinese, irrespective of the difficulty of what you're listening to relative to your own level of ability. There just aren't enough syllable types. There are many syllables that are used very, very frequently and crop up all over the place in so many different words. To the extent that your brain is hearing and processing Chinese tones, it's doing it with a terrible lag. In real time, it can be very difficult to figure out which words you're hearing because your brain, again, is just wading through treacle when it comes to processing tones. The amount of practice that is required to actually really start to hear Chinese properly and truly is quite intimidating. I would fail to, when I started listening to a lot of Chinese, I could listen to simple sentences in which I knew all the words and all the grammar. And I could listen to them being pronounced slowly and clearly and still not have any idea what I was hearing. There's something strange about Chinese, not objectively, but from the perspective of people who have not dealt with that kind of language before. Brutally difficult to start to get to grips with Chinese listening. And last but not least, I suppose the other problem I've had with Chinese is that I'm a middle-aged man. I'm not going to live in China ever, I don't imagine. I'll only end up living in China if something goes wrong, seriously wrong, in my life. I don't have any Chinese friends. Where I live, there's no Chinese, there's no socialization in my life that requires Chinese. It's not as important as Japanese was. When I was studying Japanese, it's not as important as Spanish has been in my life. And Russian too, though I don't live in Russia and never have done, Russian has come to be an important part of my life. Russian is something that I've been quite passionate about, I suppose. Certainly during various periods over the last several years. Chinese is not as important, I don't think, in my life, not as useful, and it's always a bit of an uphill struggle to maintain your focus on something like that, which I've done through a combination of my own intrinsic sense of discipline, my interest in languages, my interest in gradually building a knowledge of certain important and interesting languages, and so on and so forth. But I have to say that it's been harder than anything. Subjectively speaking, in terms of how it's made me feel, learning Chinese has been harder even than learning Japanese. And I was learning Japanese in a structured environment at university, which provides a lot of psychological reinforcement. But that said, it's just been terribly brutal. And that's despite the fact that I didn't have to learn to read Chinese characters from scratch, which I did when I was learning Japanese. So yeah, I've been quite astonished by Chinese and how horrendously difficult it is. I would not have imagined that it could seem to be more difficult than Japanese. Subjectively, it has been, and maybe even objectively, if you like, it's been harder than Japanese. So that's just a bit of waffle, really. I'm happy to, undoubtedly I'll keep talking about this in the future because I'm still studying Chinese and I'm sure I'll have other things that I want to say about it. But the difficulty of it has been off the scale, completely brutal. And it's only the peculiar circumstances of the pandemic and my personal situation in life that have given me the colossal amount of time and energy that I've needed to focus on it. I would never have made my way through it, and I'm nearly through it now, otherwise. Another 6 months of hammering away at it, and I think, yeah, I should be at a solidish B2, but it has been terribly hard. And I would probably not recommend this sort of study to anyone of my age, because by the time you're my age, there are normally other things that you have to do in life. You have other responsibilities. Anyway, that's it. Waffle over. Any comments or questions, I'd be happy to address them. That's it for now. I'm sure there'll be more nonsense about Chinese in the future. Thanks for listening all the way through the video, and thanks very much. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.